For most of galactic history, the Republic, both old and new, reigned supreme. It always represented the majority of the galaxy and all of its diverse species, and provided a prosperous and calm center in the chaotic storm. But not a century or perhaps decade goes by in the Republic without some great calamity, crisis, or invasion. There have been civil wars, ancient religious rivalries, and even extragalactic invaders, all of whom threatened to destroy everything that the trillions upon trillions of beings in this galaxy toiled for tens of thousands of years to build. Yet somehow, against all odds, the center has always held. Sure, great rivals like the Sith Empire and the Yuzhang Vong have brought the Republic to its knees, and the Galactic Empire and the First Order were even able to take complete control. But in the long run, the Republic always came back.
Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today I want to discuss why the Galactic Republic was able to last longer than almost any other government in galactic history, both canon and legends. We're going to take a look at the economic and defense policies the Republic favored and why this very flexible society was able to outlast much more militarized and fearsome factions. In 1000 BBY, the Old Republic passed the Rusan Reformation. This dismantled the entire federal military and removed their Jedi leaders from positions of power within that military. In 4 ABY, in the last years of the Galactic Civil War, the New Republic signed the Military Disarmament Act, which would greatly reduce the size and strength of the New Republic's defensive capabilities. Now, in both cases, this wasn't a complete destruction of the Galactic Republic's ability to defend itself. Instead, what they did was they took funds allocated for federal defense and gave them to local and planetary defense forces. In the New Republic's case, a home fleet was established. This was a quick reaction force of larger capital ships that could rush off to any New Republic system and aid the local planetary defense forces in case they were getting overwhelmed by some larger threat. Now, this kind of demilitarization is political, but it also has an economic side to it. You're going to save a lot of money by not having a large standing military that you have to fund, train, and supply. Now, defending the nation and its people is one of the primary functions of government. And the Republic, as we've shown in these two previous examples, has always seemed hesitant in fulfilling this role, even though it was never hesitant about collecting massive amounts of taxes and tariffs. Governments like the one the Republic had, in which a general consensus must be reached by the populace for any major action like the declaration of war to happen, are generally less militaristic than regimes that are autocratic or totalitarian in nature, like the First Order or the Galactic Empire. And that's because free and enlightened people, and I guess some of the more sentient alien species, see little benefit in overspending on military expenditure. As long as, of course, they feel safe and there's no immediate threat of attack. But then again, we're pretty short-sighted and a lot of attacks are like, surprise! Throughout galactic history, the core regions of the galaxy were relatively peaceful and very prosperous. This is where the majority of the populace reside. Elected officials ideally are driven by their constituents' wishes, and so spending credits on infrastructure development or social programs like education and healthcare are what most senators will want to favor in these systems because that's usually what the people want. But the thing is, in a market-oriented society like the Republic, there is a finite amount of capital that can be directed to either economic and social growth or to military growth. Obviously, there is some crossover in between these two sides. Military investments do obviously create jobs and other things. But if we take a look at the classic economic model known as the Blaster and Ewok Jerky curve, overproduction in one category takes away from the other. And so let's say you're living in the Republic right before the Clone Wars started. You've most likely seen 1,000 years of peace, and so you don't want your government to be spending massive amounts of money on Star Destroyers when instead they can be directing money towards government subsidies for Ewok Jerky, so that Ewok Jerky, one of the most delicious meats in the entire galaxy, can be affordable for everyone. And it's only natural to love Ewok jerky. We see this in real life too. Take a look at NATO, which is made out of mostly Western liberal democracies. These countries are supposed to spend around 2% of their GDP on defense, and basically only Poland takes that seriously. But then again, just months ago, the idea of war in Europe was on no one's mind. And so the idea of spending money on tanks and planes that might become outdated before they're actually used, well, that wasn't really on most politicians' agendas. But with the recent brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, now Belgium, Romania, Italy, Spain, Norway, Sweden have all pledged to increase spending. Even solitary Finland, who famously held the Russians back by themselves during the Winter War in 1939, is now thinking about joining NATO. They'll also be increasing their defense budget by 70%. And a lot of Americans, including myself, have been critical towards these Western European countries for not spending enough on their defense, but they have managed to spend that money on developing their economies, and let's be honest, it ended up being okay for one sole reason, because Ukraine held the line. They bought the rest of the world time with the blood of their people. So balance is key here. When you invest heavily only into your military, like North Korea and also the Russian Federation to a certain extent, and you neglect civilian infrastructure and society, in the long run, it could actually hurt your military. The RAND Corporation published an excellent paper on this. They highlighted the problems with prioritizing defense spending over infrastructure investment. Crumbling roads, bridges, and railways could actually impact the industrial capabilities of a nation and could eventually even affect the military-industrial complex and, of course, how fast mobilization occurs if a country is actually attacked. In the Galactic Empire's case, you had something even more extreme happen. Literally, the military-industrial complex took over, replaced, and destroyed all other industries in town. This type of centralized control of the economy was brutal. In the richer core worlds, you still had some stability and even wealthy areas, but in the Outer Rim, these heavy-handed policies led to huge imbalances and shortages in essential production like food and basic goods. As more resources and manpower were redirected to the defense industry, it became harder and harder to get basic goods because production was just disappearing in other sectors. And so people started relying on black market, smugglers for items, and some even got violent and started trying to overthrow the government. It's no surprise that the Outer Rim would be a popular place for the rebellion to recruit from. So the Galactic Republic, throughout its history, has always been hilariously unprepared for, invasions. Take a look at the Great Hyperspace War and this hilarious map of the Sith offensive. They basically drove directly through the heart of the galaxy straight to Coruscant unopposed. Before the Republic finally responded, led by the Jedi, they would regroup and annihilate the Sith forces. They would even carry a counter-invasion and essentially genocide the Sith on their homeworld. Then there's the Great Sith War, which was a bit more complicated, but again, the same thing happened. You had this initial Sith success before the Republic mobilized its massive economy and military might and crushed them once again. And then during the Mandalorian War, the Republic basically allowed the Mandalorians to rape and pillage and genocide their way across the Outer Rim for more than a decade, before finally the Mandalorians attacked the Euseminopolis of Taris, which was located on the border of the Outer Rim and civilized space. And so the Republic would once again wake up, mobilize with the help of the Jedi, and slowly turn the tide against the Mandalorians. So are you guys seeing the pattern here? Well, one, the Republic does not care about the Outer Rim that much. It uses it as a buffer zone and allows the enemies to basically come in, do whatever they want there, gain some kind of false confidence before they head towards the core, and by that time the Republic has bought enough time to militarize once again. And then two, it didn't really matter that the Sith and the Mandalorians were far better trained, had better technology, better military tradition, and that's because the Republic was so far ahead when it came to economic, political, and social development. The Sith Empire was a despotic regime with a centrally controlled government and military industry. The Mandalorians were a group of military-focused nomads, and the majority of their population were fighters. These factions were just really antiquated in how they were able to motivate humans to create capital and worth. All they were really good at doing was causing death and destruction. During the Imperial Age, you had either state-controlled defense contractors like Senior Fleet Systems, or semi-private companies like Incom Corporation, where most of the senior staff were purged because of their anti-imperial views. And so there was no real market competition. The best and most efficient companies didn't rise to the top. They were basically selected by the empire based on their political loyalty, which of course does not equal great production. The empire, however, was able to scale up everything so that they could mass produce ships at a very cheap rate. But these companies could not survive without their military contracts and subsidies, which of course makes it very inefficient and expensive to maintain these massive companies during peacetime. Republic companies like Quad Systems Engineering were successful for tens of thousands of years. Even during the Rusan Reformation period, where the construction of large capital ships was essentially very illegal and there were no military contracts, these shipbuilders still survived and even prospered. And that's because this is a financially driven company. It was more flexible. It was capable of making cuts to costs and labor when necessary and readjust its focus. I mean, it even could switch its production from military ships to civilian ships. The mobilization of the massive industrial power of the United States during World War II is a great example of what a market economy can do. We've all heard about the Chrysler automobile plants that churned out Sherman tanks, or Ford's Willow-turned-bomber factory. But did you know Gibson Inc., the company that builds awesome guitars, helped manufacture components for gliders and also radar systems? And long before American troops even touched down in North Africa or in the Pacific, the American Lend and Lease program was keeping the Allied powers alive in Europe. This was the true secret to the Republic's success. It had this massive manufacturing infrastructure that could be retooled relatively quickly to produce anything it wanted to. And that's because during wartime, every sort of government has more centralized control over what happens, and a market economy is far more flexible and more efficient at just generating and creating things. The old Republic didn't have a Sherman tank, but they had the reliable old Republic Hammerhead cruiser. This design remained relatively unchanged for several thousands of years. It was just continuously upgraded as a platform, and even though it was smaller than their Sith counterparts, the Republic Hammerhead always came in greater numbers and overwhelmed their enemies through sheer consistency. And so yeah, the Galactic Republic strategy might be really boring, but so is logistics. And logistics is probably the most important part of any conflict. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan and my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.